I'm Riley Reese. This is the Sofia Unfiltered Podcast, where we bring together thought leaders, wellness entrepreneurs, makers, and emerging health leaders. We're here to have raw, unfiltered conversations because sharing your stories has the power to change lives, help others heal, and transform the way we take care of ourselves. Here we go.
Welcome, everybody, to the Sofia Unfiltered Podcast. Today, Riley and I were able to talk with Ken Davenport. Ken is a writer, speaker, entrepreneur. He's in San Diego, and he has built many businesses. He's lived all over the world, and now he spends a lot of his free time helping veterans in transition. And in his free time, not that there's a lot of that, but in his free time, he's written 2 books on Stoicism. And today he came to talk to us all about Stoicism. It's not what you think. Told us some principles, and really was a delight to hear about applying these principles to our life. Riley and I loved chatting with him. We hope that you'll like it as much as we did. And check it out. Here is Ken Davenport.
Hi, Ken. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Riley. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Ken, just hearing that you've written, well, more than 2 books, but 2 books specifically on Stoicism. And I really wanted to bring you on to tell our listeners about Stoicism, promote your books, of course, but just get them to know a little bit about you, because I think you're such an interesting person and your journey has been really, really interesting and just inspiring too. So, for our listeners that don't know you, could you let them know a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, thank you. So I'm really a lifelong entrepreneur. Started my first company out of grad school and kind of never really kind of looked back. And I think about 12 years ago, found myself in a bit of an existential crisis about my life and what I was doing, and wondering how I could have more meaning in the work that I was doing, and not feeling too fulfilled. I had to kind of make a break from the sort of entrepreneurship world and try to, figure out what I could do with my time and talent. And that would give me something that I could kind of leave behind that was meaningful. There's nothing wrong with making money, and I certainly employed a lot of people, and I enjoyed that process. But at the end of the day, I kind of was starting to think about the story that I was writing about my life that would be told when I was gone, and didn't necessarily feel it was very meaningful, I think. And so about a decade ago, I left my company, started a year-long process of wandering and volunteering and bumping up against, walls, and just trying to figure out like what is important to me and how could I do something with the next 15, 20 years of my career that would give back to others, really, is what it really came down to.
I really like how you describe that, like wandering and, kind of bumping into walls. Like, what are some of the other things that you did that didn't pan out? Like, how did you find your way?
Well, I had a lot of coffees with strangers, which, of course, I tell veterans to do because it's super effective in, getting you through those awkward moments of not really knowing to say to people, and just learning a lot about different careers, but, different industries and different kind of things that people were doing with their lives that they seemed to be super passionate about. And I wanted to understand, kind of why that resonated with them. And I talked to a lot of people that, were very, very passionate about what they were doing, but, obviously had no interest for me. So there were a lot of trial and error, just a lot of learning. And I think you finally find your way when things start to resonate with you and you think, yeah, I want to learn a little bit more about that. And for me, the veteran space was kind of that kind of area that really resonated with me. I was volunteering with a group that was doing some work with the Armed Services YMCA up at Camp Pendleton. This was 2009, 2010, when the Marines were, heavily deployed, and a lot of young Marine families were struggling, and the Armed Services Y was working to just try to help their lives, family lives, be richer, better, more support. And I just remember leaving that thinking, oh my God, I'm in love with this. Like, this is a group I want to help. And that kind of got me down the path of working with the military and now veterans, and just trying to, do what I can to help their transition to the civilian world be as effective as possible.
Do you know what it is about that group that really lights you up? Because that's also a group that's near and dear to my heart.
I was just about to ask the same thing. Like, what is it about this group that just resonates?
I've asked myself that question a lot, and of course, a lot of people have asked me the same. I mean, my father was in the Air Force during the Korean War, and I certainly have always felt a patriotic streak in me, but it's more of the sense of belonging. It's almost like an envy of the sense of community and belonging that the military has.
And I'll just throw in some in there. Is this only for the Marines that you liked down there at Camp Pendleton? Because I was Air Force. So
no. I mean,
is this for everybody?
Yeah, for sure.
Or are you specifically only loving those Marines?
No, I mean, I do.
Michelle's down there helping in the Navy.
Yeah. I do love the Marines for lots of reasons, but no, yeah, it's we're branch agnostic. So there you go.
Just making sure all of our listeners who might be Army and.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I've got some good buddies who are in the Army here, or they're living here, who were in the Army. I just, I think you get different things from the different branches, and they have very distinct personalities. So it is interesting as a civilian to kind of come to that, not in terms of an inner service rivalry, but just like having these interactions and realizing that, wow, these folks are wired. They're just all wired differently. They all kind of do different things, and they all have a different kind of approach to things.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And you love it so much that you founded a new company.
Well, yeah. So my company is called Mission Edge. I started in 2011 with a couple of co-founders, one of who's still on my board. But so what happened is that company basically is a consulting firm mostly to help other nonprofits with their back office support and accounting, HR, help them to kind of get their projects up and off the ground. That did come out of the work that I did with the military in the very early stages, because I realized I wanted to be in the nonprofit space. Wasn't sure I wanted to run a nonprofit, but here I am running a nonprofit. But we're a little bit different in that we're mostly fee supported, so we're not raising philanthropic capital all the time, which I think was the thing that I didn't really want to do. And but we do work with the Honor Foundation. We work with lots of veteran service organizations as a part of this work, and then I do a lot of the work with veterans, kind of on my own time, and IVMF where I speak, and the book that I wrote called The Stoic Transition, which is really to use Stoic principles and applying it to your transition out of the military, and providing some tools and some guidelines to kind of how to approach change as a part of that process.
Okay, I really want to dig into the Stoicism, because first sent me book, I was like, Stoicism. I hadn't even heard of that. And I was thinking like Stoic, like, and I wonder if other people think that too, like when you hear of Stoicism. And it's a whole kind of way of thinking and belief system. And I got into it very briefly. I skimmed through your book. When it's on audiobook, I'm going to be all over it.
Okay.
For that. But could you tell our listeners a little bit about what Stoicism is, kind of how you found it or it found you, and just kind of like familiarize us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Such an interesting question. And actually, I think I've been a Stoic for a long time, but kind of didn't really know it. I think that's one of the reasons why it resonated with me when I finally heard about it. And I remember I was listening to, I think, the Happiness podcast, and I was just kind of thinking about, trying to figure out, like, what is happiness? Like, I was asking myself a bunch of questions about, what do these terms really mean for your life? How do you be happy all the time, which is, I think, people's goals. And even though it's not really possible, to do that. And this woman was talking about Stoicism, and I wrote it down. I literally like, what is that? Like, I did not even know what it was either. This was probably 3.5 years ago. And I started researching it and realizing that, man, like, this is a framework that really resonates with me. And I'm kind of trying to do a lot of this already, but it just gave me this structural sort of framework and a historical context to the fact that 2,500 years ago, people were still dealing with the same kinds of struggles that we're dealing with in this modern world. The anxiety of change, of not being able to control, what's in front of you, the idea that, you can sort of choose to, be harmed by something that happens to you or choose not to be. It's kind of up to you. And those are sort of things that I was always trying to incorporate in my life, but I didn't really know, didn't have a framework for it. So this gave me like this structure, and I'm like, oh my God, there's some rules here. There's some virtues that you can apply. There's lots of very powerful quotes and from history that you can sort of utilize, and it's something that you can practice on a regular basis.
If you're going to try to like recruit one of our listeners to be part of the Stoicism movement, what would you tell them about it? Like, what is it and what do they believe in?
Yeah, so I would say you could define Stoicism a bunch of different ways. I think the way that I think about it is it's really about living with intention. Stoics talk about living with virtue, and the 4 virtues that they live with is wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage. And to the Stoics, if you live with those virtues, you will live a happy, fulfilling, meaningful life. I don't know that it's quite that simple, but there are definitely, touchstones of which to think about how to approach the things that happen to you, even on a day-to-day basis. But it's really about using your power of reason to address the world around you, to look at what's in front of you, and to decide with intentionality how you're going to react. So Stoic, the small s Stoic is, as you said, be stern and kind of like, unemotional. The big S Stoic and Stoicism is not about not being emotional. It's about managing your emotions so they don't get in the way of you living a fulfilling, purposeful, intentional life. And so when they talk about like anger, like there's a chapter in my book about anger, and, I'm someone who struggled with anger in the past. And I realized that when you get angry, I always just say to myself, when I get angry and I have a reaction, and that reaction is disproportional to the situation, and I get triggered by something, I give away my power, because now suddenly the discussion is about my reaction and not about the thing that got me angry in the first place, which may have been a legitimate thing. And so the Stoics would say, hey, anger is going to distort the reality in front of you. It's going to shift the focus away from the topic to you, and it's something that you should try to avoid. Now, anger sometimes is a good emotion if it's channeled right, but the Stoics really want you to take a step back and be very intentional about how you react, when you react, what you say, how you say it. And it's really just being mindful of the fact that oftentimes when you're emotional, your decisions are not the best, and that it's good to take a pause. So they talk a lot about like, hey, put that to the test. Go out, take a walk around the block, come back, take a deep breath, do some breathing exercises, and then come back to the topic, as opposed to reacting immediately, which is what most of us are prone to do, right? So it's about living with intention. It's about focusing on what you can control, which is really the key theme of Stoicism, which is, hey, there are things in life that you can control and things you can't. Focus your energies on the things that you actually have agency over, which generally is yourself. It's not other people. Like, I have an 18-year-old son. Oh my God, this is a constant conversation in my house about like, I want to control that. I can't control that. The only thing I can control is my obsession about it, my focus on it, my anger about it, my frustration. Like it's all the work has to be done inside of me. I'm in control of my own perceptions about what's in front of me. So focusing on what you can control, super powerful. And then the third thing I would say would be about choosing your lens. We can look at things in many different ways. It's sort of the half glass full, half glass empty thing. You can decide to be harmed by something or not. You can choose to, turn the other cheek and realize that, hey, maybe that sucked, but I'm going to use that to fuel my excitement and drive to fix it or to do something new. And really deciding that you're not going to get mired in this sort of, self-pity and sort of victim mentality of that the world is against me and so I can't succeed. And so it's kind of up to you to decide how to react to that. So those three things are kind of the core, I think, of how Stoicism can kind of be applied to your life.
And has that changed your life a lot? I mean, it sounds like it has. I feel like that's kind of a silly question, but
Yeah, it has, but I will tell you, it's a practice that I've read this, but it's a practice that takes practice. So it's like any kind of lifestyle change, you got to practice it, and it's about forming habits. It's about being very mindful and intentional about your reactions to things. And a lot of times in life, you can't always catch it. You understand it afterward, but the goal, I think, is to try to catch it beforehand. And I'm a work in progress. I mean, I've made a lot of progress in my life in terms of my contentment and happiness. But, like anything that you do, you just got to keep exercising it.
Now, Stoicism in the military is super deep rooted, right? So do you see this going kind of hand in hand with what you've seen? I mean, especially in the Marine Army side of the house, right? So is this kind of where this comes from, this kind of world kind of tying together, like you started hanging out with all the Marines and then years later you're writing on Stoicism?
I mean, I think that Stoicism definitely resonates with particularly the combat arms, like, the Marines that, I do work with Navy SEALs. I mean, definitely that group, it resonates with that group a lot around, kind of really focusing on what you can control and kind of being as prepared as possible. One of the things that the Stoics talk about is, kind of preparing for failure. So how you prepare for failure is you go through every contingency possible and make sure that when failure does happen, which it will, that you're maximally prepared to deal with whatever happens because you've already thought about it. Like that's the kind of stuff that, like the combat arms really loves, because they're always doing like contingency planning and scenario planning or whatever. But for me, I think it was a happy marriage that kind of came together with me kind of searching maybe for an operating system for my own life. I think I didn't grow up with any religion. I didn't really have, I think, even at this age, I didn't have really a framework to kind of look at my life and how I was addressing the world and what the future looked like as I look at my parents getting old, and you think about death. And the Stoics were, have a really big on like, kind of preparing yourself for an inevitable end, which comes for everybody, and not being afraid of it, not shying away from it, but using it to have the good conversations you need to have now, living fully now. I think Seneca said, you should balance your books every day. Don't leave anything unsaid. You never know when the last opportunity to talk to somebody will be. Those kinds of things, which appealed to me as I've gotten older. But I wrote the Stoic Transition because as I was working with transitioning veterans, teaching transition classes, I realized that, man, a lot of these things that they're dealing with are things that like I've dealt with in transition, and Stoicism has such powerful tools for dealing with just the uncertainty of a world that, you don't understand, of this avalanche of information that comes at you very quickly that you can't make sense of because you don't really understand it all, of thinking about what your friends are doing as opposed to what you're doing. A lot of things that just Stoicism kind of fits really naturally in. And this whole thing about failure, which I think is one of the most compelling talks that I have with veterans around, veterans tend not to want to fail for obvious reasons, but I think failure is not encouraged in the military, let's put it that way, I think, as much as it is in the tech world. And I come out of the tech world. So for me, it's like, hey, you're going to screw up a lot. Like, that's good. That's your opportunity to learn. It's opportunity to say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's see something else. And I think that framework is important because I think a lot of the transition veterans I talk to, they don't want to make a mistake. They want to get the right job right away, and they want to have the next phase of their career be seamless and without a hiccup. And that's just not really realistic, right? So I think there's just been a natural kind of marriage of the veteran work I do and Stoicism. And yeah. It's been interesting.
So specifically for our listeners, are there specific practices, like Stoic practices or exercises that you think are helpful to maintain this mental resilience?
Yeah, I think it's more, it's going to sound very familiar to anybody who's done any mindfulness work or whatever, but honestly, I think you need to free space in your mind to have these conversations with yourself about your day, about what's to come, about what's happening right now. And to do that, you need space. And so whether it's 5 minutes in the morning or whether it's a 20-minute walk, and I really encourage people to walk because I think fresh air and exercise has been scientifically proven to be a really good way for you to think through a lot of these things. And just to practice the idea of putting your phone away, being still, moving, but having your mind be still, and just be open to the ideas and the thoughts that you will have when you're not scrolling through Instagram or not on your email or whatever. So just space. The other thing I think is journaling, which the Stoics talk a lot about. Marcus Aurelius actually's book, The Meditations, which is a very famous book now and being read all over the world. James Mattis had it in Iraq with him by his bedside, was a journal, private journal that he wrote to himself, never expecting anybody to ever read it. And it's just pages and pages of wisdom about dealing with being Roman emperor and how hard that was and how many decisions he had to make and all the stress that he was under. But journaling was one way for him to work through some of these issues, some of the challenges of life on his own. And just by writing it down, it gives voice to it, allows you to kind of analyze it yourself and get it out. So I think journaling is important, and journaling's hard. It's been hard for me. I've had to really learn to do it. And then, I think basically opening yourself up to any kind of support, whether it's the therapy or whether it's church or whatever, then just being around people who can help you work through some of the challenges you have if you're not able to kind of do it on your own, which a lot of people aren't, which is where the whole mental health kind of apparatus, I think, comes to play. So real simple, very common sense stuff. But I think in this world, and one of the reasons why mindfulness has taken off so much is because, we don't take a lot of time to do that now because we have the world at our fingertips, literally, and it's hard to break away from it.
Yeah, I can really hear where having support and having other people that are trying to better themselves in this way would be so important, because it's like you're learning a new language of how you want to behave, and you can be excited about that up front, but it really, like you said, requires that practice.
It really does. And I think there's, the good news is that Ryan Holiday, who writes the Daily Stoic and has been a prolific writer, he's got a great podcast where you can hear, daily Stoic affirmations. Many of the, big podcasters from Jocko Willink to Chris Williamson, I mean, they all have elements of Stoicism in the stuff that they talk about. And so there's a lot of Stoic content out there, which I think is good. But, you have to adapt it to your own life. And I think it's one of these things you kind of need to customize for, how you live and what you need as a person. There's no one size fits all, but it is some really powerful tools, even if it's just a quote. Like I gave my son this quote the other day, wrote it down. I actually texted him. He wrote it down on a piece of paper and stuck it in his phone, which I thought was kind of a victory, actually. But it was Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality, right? And, as an 18-year-old kid with, going off to college next year and all of the anxiety around what might happen, it's like you get very mired in the idea that I'm suffering about what my projections are going to be, I'm projecting my suffering and then it may not come to pass. So try not to suffer it twice,
Yeah. And you're talking about things that I talk about with my clients on a weekly basis. First of all, the difference between pain and suffering. So like whatever the thing we're stressing about going to college, if that happens, it'll be painful. But suffering is all the mental gymnastics we do around that. And, doing psychedelic therapy, one of the most important things is keep moving forward in your journey. Just keep moving forward, keep progressing forward. Don't stay attached to whatever painful thing is happening. And I hear that in the Stoicism too. So I wrote down the Ryan Holiday thing. I'm like, I'm going to have to start following the Daily Stoic, but I have a selfish question. So when I opened into your book, there was a part that jumped out at me. Of course, I believe that there's no coincidences, but it was about procrastination, and I am a horrible procrastinator. So Ken, help me with procrastination, with like the Stoic principles, because I know I'm not the only one. I know some of our listeners procrastinate.
Yeah, no, you're definitely not the only one. I mean, Marcus Aurelius even has a famous sort of thing in Meditations where he's talking about on a cold morning how he's laying under the covers and doesn't want to get out of bed. He's like, is this what I'm meant to be, like warm under the covers, or am I meant to get up and do the work that I'm meant to do in my life, right? So struggling to just kind of get moving in the day. And we all have that resistance, what Stephen Pressfield calls the resistance, which is particularly for anybody doing any kind of creative work, any kind of intellectual work, any kind of artistic, anything that requires you to get up and move your brain and move something that is somewhat amorphous, particularly forward, is subject to the resistance. So, you're definitely not alone. I think we all suffer from certain amounts of inertia in moving forward. So what do you do? I mean, I think that, it's all the stuff that you've probably heard, Atomic Habits, is a great book that talks about consistency over intensity. So just getting up and getting started, getting up early, doing one thing in the day. Admiral McRaven wrote this book called Make Your Bed, with the idea being, hey, the first thing you should do is make your bed, because if that's all you do during the day, at least you've made your bed and you come home to a made bed and you think, I accomplished one thing today, right? And so it's kind of little things like that. It's just sort of getting started. And I think part of the opportunity that the Stoics thought about was it's not necessarily even the end result that you're accomplishing, it's the process of moving forward. So in other words, the process of making progress is almost more important than the progress itself, because you start to look at yourself as someone that gets things done. So James Clear in Atomic Habits, for example, says, hey, you want to work out, the first thing you do is, even if you go to the gym for 5 minutes and lay yoga mat out and lay down, do a couple stretches, get up and leave, that's a success, because you're now someone who goes to the gym every day, right? So you're now someone who actually does practice what they're preaching. And that practice, if you ingrain it as a habit, will become easier and easier, and you will get more and more done over time. So it's just, there's no secret shortcut. It's, I think a lot of it is consistency, doing one thing every day and getting one thing accomplished every day, knowing that, and there's science in the brain for this, that the more you accomplish, the easier it is the subsequent accomplishments are going to be, because if you do something hard, it actually creates a less resistance for doing more hard things later. There's no, as I said, I don't think there's any magic pill, unfortunately. But it's consistency.
Yep, it's consistency. And so setting the bar low to where you're going to get a ringer, and then anything over that is gravy. So if you hit that mark, which you set really low, it's like, okay, I've done that. Especially, folks that struggle with depression or other challenges. It's like sometimes just getting out of bed, screw the bed. Like maybe you don't make the bed, but like you got out of bed today. That is awesome. You made coffee. That's great. And you have to titrate that down.
I think the other piece of this that's interesting is our expectations are often our own worst kind of enemy, if you will. Like we have high expectations of ourselves, and so failing to meet them is automatically seen as, well, I didn't accomplish what I was supposed to today, right? But who says that today on a Monday or whatever is what you're supposed to have accomplished, except that's what you're telling yourself. And so I think sometimes it's managing your own expectations about how fast progress will come or what you will get accomplished at any given time. And rather than turning that into a negative where you are hard on yourself because you've now failed, you have to recraft that conversation in your mind around, well, I didn't have to get all that done today. That was an artificial goal that I put on it. And I actually did accomplish some great things today, even though I didn't get all the way to the end of my list, right? But don't you turn that into a defeat, right? Even though it really is a victory. So I think a lot of it depends on how you frame it in your own mind and whether you're going to allow your own high expectations to turn you into someone who is now a slacker, even though you're really not.
I could see where that just takes on its whole like momentum in a good way or a bad way, that, your life consists of whatever you think about all day. And so if you're saying like, oh, I'm a loser, I didn't meet this goal, you can just shift the way that you're viewing it. It's just, then it becomes less oppressive. And I guess you're more likely to do. I mean, I actually feel like I want to jump off this call. I'm like, I will write some progress notes. I feel like, and then I'm going to go to the gym for 5 minutes. But yeah, I really like that softening, like harsh, that expectation of like, oh, if you're not going to, run a marathon, then why would you even run around the block? It's useless. It's like, well, it's not useless. It adds up.
It all adds up. And I think the small steps, add up. It's like, thinking about losing weight, which I'm sure a lot of people, who I know and I've struggled with myself, you think about like, well, the overwhelming idea of losing 25 pounds when you're starting at zero is just crushing, right? So you say, oh my God, that's such a hard thing. I don't think I can do it. I'm not even going to try. But, you put a few good days of eating together and some exercise, and suddenly you can, got a little bit of momentum. Maybe you lose half a pound, and then you think, okay, well, I'm kind of on my way. But you don't do it all at once. You do it, in small steps.
And it's also about the journey, right? So if you look at like vacations, people say, well, the end goal is you're going to end up right back where you started. So why would you even go, right? Sometimes It's just about the journey, right? Get out of bed, see what happens. Maybe don't lose 25 pounds overnight, but the journey to get there, right?
Yeah, well, it is definitely about the journey. I think that is part of it's such a cliche, but it is. The Stoics talk a lot about the fact the past is over, the future is unknown. All you have is the journey you're on today. It is where you are right now, right? That's really all you have. They have this thing, Stoics have this thing called amor fati, which is love your fate. And really, it's not so much about love your long-term fate. It's about loving kind of how you ended up right where you are. And even though some of it may be crummy, you embrace all of it, because all of it, inside all of it, there's a lesson for you of some sort. What, the good, the bad, the ugly, it all is part of the milieu that you find yourself living in. And it is really what you should be embracing, because it is what you have.
I love that. There's so much freedom in that. When you come back to the present moment, like typically we're not like, digging ditches in the present moment. Like typically it's pretty okay in the now. And I could just like feel myself rest into like, oh yeah, I'm doing this podcast. It's really nice. I've got stressful things that happened before and stressful things that are going to happen after. But when I just come back to the now, it's like, I can just enjoy being here.
Yeah. I think a lot of people think, well, love your fate sort of means stop trying to move forward, and you should, but that's not really what it means at all. It means, yes, of course you're moving forward, but if all your value is on where you're going, then as you said, you miss the journey, right? And all that time, and we all know, and I've had this in my own career where I had this goal, and I felt a lot about the goal, and I worked really hard for it, and then I got the goal, and then the next day I was like, man, I'm depressed. Like it wasn't all that I thought I was going to be.
You hear this over and over and over in tech, like over and over and over. Why is that? Because you didn't realize it was a journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of the cultural sort of zeitgeist that, you build your company up and you sell it for lots of money, and that's the goal, right? I mean, yes, there are lots of people in health tech that are actually trying to create value in their products, but I mean, if you talk to a founder, I mean, I think their dream would be, Google's going to buy me and I'm going to cash out, and you're going to have all this wealth, and you're going to work, 18-hour days to get there, but then it still leaves you empty at the end. You have money, but now you don't have your company anymore. Right? Or whatever. And you're not really necessarily in control of your destiny anymore. So you've actually traded all that for the cash. And I think that looks good to a lot of people, but I've got friends who've been through that, and the cash, it's great to have money, and it certainly is better than being poor, Stoics believed that money was, valuable in the sense that it's better than not having it. But otherwise, they were kind of indifferent to it because money can't buy you virtue, can't buy you happiness. But I do think tech is sort of rife with a lot of folks who are wealthy and not necessarily very happy and not very fulfilled.
Well, I want to know when your audiobook's coming out because I want to hear it as I've got my many-hour car drive every day.
All right, I'm working on it.
Okay, better be in your voice too. I hate it when authors don't read it in their own voice. It's like I want to hear it from your voice.
Okay, I think this book, particularly my new book, The Stoic Edge, is there's so much of me in it that it would be hard for someone else to read it, I think. So I will definitely be narrating it, for better or for worse.
Well, Ken, where can our listeners find the Stoic Transition and the Stoic Edge if they want to, purchase it?
Yeah, thank you for asking. They're both on Amazon right now in paperback and Kindle. Yeah, and you can Google my name or Google the Stoic Edge, and they can find it.
And how can folks connect with you if they want to know more? Or do you do coaching for just the average civilian? Do you do that too?
Yes, so they can connect with me on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the easiest way, and I'm more than happy to chat with folks who are interested in integrating a Stoic practice into their life. I have been doing some coaching, certainly coaching a lot of the veterans I work with, but I'm thinking about coaching more with corporate clients and stuff. So if there's anybody's interested in talking about it, I'm more than happy to kind of sit down and kind of talk about what it looks like.
Okay, so LinkedIn, that's very awesome to be available. And I'm going to talk to you more about Stoicism. I'm telling you, I need that book. And there's 3 questions that we ask every guest, same 3 questions. And it's, what are the 3 pillars of health and wellness in your life?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, definitely exercise for sure. I would say mindfulness, but I think probably my Stoic practice is a little bit of a mindful practice. So every day spending, 5 to 30 minutes kind of in a sort of a meditative state, I guess. And then really, really focus now on clean diet and eating as cleanly as possible, knowing that, the years and years of chemicals and stuff in the food that we eat, whatever, as you get older, start to become more and more apparent. And so I've just been really, really focused on farm to table and kind of looking at, how to eat as healthy as possible so you feel as good as you can physically, to be as strong as you can be, and then to be as mindful and present as you can be.
I love that. And it's just funny how similar they all seem to be shaping up, now that we've been asking this for a while, right? So, physical exercise, good nutrition, and meditating, are generally the top 3 that we're getting. Michelle, have you noticed anything different? And sleep. Yes, I know. Sleep.
Oh my God. Sleep might be the most important one, actually. So yeah, that's a good one.
Oh, Ken, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to us and to tell our listeners about Stoicism and everything all the great work you do.
Especially for the veterans.
It's been great. Great chatting with you both.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, Riley.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been Sofia Unfiltered, a podcast by Sofia Health, the #1 marketplace for health and wellness. Find services, classes, and products from the top health and wellness providers. Book an appointment or join live classes now. I'm your host, Riley Reese. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear about it in the comments section of your favorite podcast provider or with a 5-star rating. Let us know what your biggest takeaway from this episode was, or share it with someone you hope to inspire. Join us again next time for more real conversations, stories, and insights that help empower you with the knowledge and inspiration needed to transform how we care for ourselves.